Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Carl Cox is the CEO and founder of 40 Strategy. Carl has been an executive leader in 7 different organisations who've grown from 2x to 7x with operations in 4 continents. Today, Carl is tracking towards his 10-year vision to positively impact over 1 million people, 10,000 organisations, and to donate at least $1 million to charity. He is the host of the Measure Success podcast and is the author of Lost at CEO, an entrepreneur's guide to strategy, which was a #1 Amazon bestseller. You can find Carl at 40strategy.com. Carl, what I see in you is a human who is compelled to serve others to make them better. But I also see another side, a real competitive spirit. I see through the work that you've done that there's a thread that's helping people to become better. If that resonates with you, tell us, how did you come to be in this place?
You know, most of us have an interesting story, and if you would have told me even 10 years ago I was going to be in the spot right now, I would have said, there's absolutely no way. You know, this is not where I was supposed to be. But here I am, and I can say this before I tell you how I got to the story. I couldn't be in a more perfect spot than I am today. It's when you finally found in your life, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do, it's just an amazing feeling. So I just feel very grateful to be in that spot today. And you're right, my heart does come from helping and teaching and coaching. I coached 25 seasons of youth sports younger, and I just loved that, exactly what you said. I love winning, but I also love building a team. I love finding those hidden gems and those different athletes that have gone through there. And in the business world, I actually thought at one time I was going to coach high school sports, meaning football, but American football here in particular, and I was going to teach history. And I even just had a company set up where I was going to do that. And that kind of leads into the story of how I got to where I am. I started out many years ago as a bean counter, so meaning I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers, earned a CPA here, certified public accountant, and by the age of 30, I was just going to skip through, eventually became a CFO of a privately held company. And this was after being 5 years as a corporate controller for a publicly traded company. And it was a great job. I loved the opportunity. But they said something to me that was super interesting. They said, Carl, I don't understand what you're doing. What is your strategy? And I can admit at that point in my life, I didn't know what strategy meant. And so this company was built of Fortune 500 executives that just happened to be working at a small to mid-sized company. Yep. We had the privilege of growing that 3.5 times over a 5-year period. But what was really interesting is they said, Carl, would you like to try something new? And so I said yes. And so they said, why don't you take over IT? And Brad, I'm not an IT guy. And if we were in doing the EQ ahead of time, you'd recognize that is not my expertise. But we fixed it. We found a way to fix it. And then next they said, hey, Carl, that worked. Can you help out with our product technical support? Yeah. And I was like, sure. You give me a hammer, I'm going to break that nail. I am not the person to come be the handyman around your house. But we fixed it. Next thing they were like, Carl, can you help us go and build distribution centers in Europe? I was like, sure, never been to Europe before. Helped build up 3 distribution centers over there. And so I continue to have that journey, eventually became the operations manager, started doing supply source management, did lead management. It was awesome, just a tremendous experience. I thought I was going to be there forever. Then I got invited to join a company that grew from 50 employees to 450 employees in 3 years. crazy experience. That was just amazing. Going through that experience, had multiple different roles within that company as well. We were also really good at strategic planning and execution. We were trying to find a better way to track our strategy. Found a company based out of Australia called Cascade Strategy, and they were like, hey, there's a better way. And I was like, wow, this is an amazing product. Literally in the same phone call, I said, not only do we want to buy your product, but can we invest in you? That led to an opportunity. We formed a separate company, eventually became the reseller for them in the United States. Grew that. So while I was moonlighting, and it sold a deal finally to Johnson & Johnson, and I was like, can I do this full time? And so I did. I left my company, the comfort of my own company. And this was the surprise, Brad. I was trained, once again, for about a 12, 13, 14-year period of this is how to do strategic planning execution the right way. Yep. People were buying our software to do it. This was the interesting part. I found out then how bad people were at strategic planning and execution. I didn't realize it. And so out of that experience, it's sort of like the example I like to do for people is people were buying our software like people would buy a Peloton bike, which then meant it just became a very expensive towel rack. Yeah. Most people don't. They buy something hoping it'll become, but they don't actually have the knowledge. They don't have the habits. They don't have the vision. They don't have the execution strategies to actually get on that Peloton bike and get better fit. Same thing is in the strategic world. Same, all those areas people don't do. And so from there, I started teaching people about strategic planning execution to save our clients. It was out of necessity. I was like, what can I do? And during the same period of time, I read about 300 books in 5 years to help. I had the practical knowledge, but I didn't have the research. So it just helped me with the understanding leadership and strategic planning, how to do this better, the psychology around it. And eventually, the CEO out of Australia, Tommy, said, hey, Carl, why don't you now create and run my global consulting business? And I remember I was in a harbor in Sydney, this beautiful, we were in the sea kayak. The weather was just absolutely beautiful. But I was like, I got a bunch of kids at home. I don't think I want to travel globally as much as this is going to require. And so that's how I opened up 40 Strategy, and that's where we are today. And why we're called 40 Strategy is most organizations only spend about 2% of their time on strategy, which is equivalent to about 40 hours. So the concept is hire us to help make sure you can do that in a world-class way, beside doing the way what typically results in failure.
Cool. I like that you've explained, because I've always thought, what does 40 Strategy mean? There's obviously some meaning, so thanks for explaining that. I'm interested. Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. So like many people, I think that what I've seen through your book, by the way, Lost at CEO, which is awesome. What I think I've seen is that you've gone through the journey thinking, as you alluded to, oh, this is what it means to have a strategy or a plan. But then sometimes it can just be goals or numbers that people put on a page and they go, yeah, we've got that. But there's so much more to it. So tell us, what's the difference between just setting goals, do you think, A, and B, actually having a strategic plan?
That's a great question. And, most people refer to goals as like a New Year's resolution goal, yep. Right? Hey, it's the beginning of the year. We're going to set a goal to lose weight, right? How many people have designed that? Or I'm going to run a marathon this year, or I'm going to, you name your goal. And about 93 to 95% of those New Year's resolutions fail. Why? Number of reasons. It's interesting enough, Quitter's Day, which is about I think it's late January, is Quitter's Day, which is crazy, right? Like literally the majority of people quit by that time. And it fails for so many different reasons. What we actually outline in the book, strategy isn't just one thing, right? It's you have to encompass, and that's why we have 7 principles that we talk about with strategic planning. But to begin with, you got to have a purpose behind it, right? You got to have your why. Why do I need to lose 10 pounds, right? Honestly, if you just tell yourself lose 10 pounds, as soon as there's a temptation, you're going to turn around and change it. A friend of mine recently said something really amazing. He has genetics of Alzheimer's in his family. And he recognizes he has to change his habits to increase the likelihood of him having memory longer. Yeah. So he's done a wonderful job of changing his habits. But this is his vision. His vision is, He sees his daughter graduating from university. She's looking back into the crowd, and he's not there because he has memory loss. His vision is a fear factor. He's like, I don't want that to happen. So therefore, when I get temptation to break my habits, it's not worth being not there to see her graduate with a professor's degree. So to begin with, everything should have purpose, right? Everything should have meaning more than just the goal itself. And so that's a big part of not just creating, quote unquote, a goal. And matter of fact, we changed the language, Brad, as you know from the book. We've changed the language to a destination. Why do we call it a destination? Well, I don't know about you, but I would never hop on an airplane if I didn't think it was going to reach its destination. And that's what they say. When you hop on a plane, you have a destination. You get on a train, it has a destination. That's how we have to change our mindset when it comes to goals. They're not goals. We are going to a new place. And when you consider that we're going to a new place, all of a sudden the likelihood, and your whole brain thinks differently. It's not a New Year's resolution. It's, I have an expectation I'm going to get to this new location. And so those two things are key mindsets. Difference, what I'd say, is the difference between a goal and the beginning of the formulation of a strategic plan.
Yeah, awesome. Many times there you spoke about goals, and I'm really interested in your journey around marathons. I've run a few marathons, enough to tick a box, but not to be any good at it. But I think you've got a really interesting story about how you started off and where you're at now. Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that, and I got to admit, my history, I would have never said I was going to run. So in the past, when somebody said you're going to run a marathon, my response would be, well, isn't this why we invented vehicles? Because the first guy who ran it died. That was just my logical answer to this. Yep. And just of note, I've kept myself in, I'd call reasonable shape, historically. But to me, it was just the silliest thing in the world. And, unfortunately, right in the beginning, right in the early stages of COVID, I had this horrible moment. I thought I just had a stomach ache, and ended up my appendix had burst. And I literally ended up being in the hospital for a full week. It was actually quite a serious event. I almost was too late. And unfortunately, it worked out okay, but it took me 3 months to recover. But I said I was going to do three things when I came out of that marathon. Number one, I was going to start a podcast, which we have the Measure Success podcast. Two, I was going to write a book. That's what we've been talking about a bit today. And the third thing I was going to do is run a marathon. So once again, I was a sprinter by trade. So when I was an athlete as younger, I would run sprints. And I had done a few marathons, like those 200-mile and the equivalent, but 200-mile here in the United States, these marathons, like a 12-person team, and you'd rotate. And I'd done a few of them, but I really struggled because I wanted to sprint it. I'd try to sprint 6 miles, and that's not a good option, right, to be able to do something like that. So I had to really change my mindset to run this marathon. And I started really slowly. I literally started, hey, let's see if I could run 1 mile today. Yeah. And then I just continued that progress. Now, this is the funny part, Brad, is the first time, once again, I was a little probably too confident, hadn't run in 6 months or 9 months at all. And I read this book, Marathon, where the gentleman who wrote that book had run about 113, whatever it is. So I can't remember how many marathons he's run. I went straight to the table, and it said, here's a beginner's journey, and your first day should be a 3-mile run. Well, I failed to read the book, Brad. I just went straight to the table. I cheated. I ran that 3 miles, and I remember I was doing so great, and about halfway into it, I had to stop because of a stoplight. And all of a sudden, my legs turned to jello, absolute jello. And I remember going back to the book, and it's like, you don't become a beginner until you've been running for 2 months. You don't even get to that stage of becoming a runner. So it was a journey. It was really difficult, honestly, for me to finally get there. But I followed a plan. Took an experienced person, followed what he was doing, and eventually and then I actually read, there's nutrition. You got to have water. You have to go through all these different pieces. And then finally I made the trek down to San Diego and ran that race, and it was a battle, but it was such an amazing accomplishment, right? When you finally get there, get across the finish line, get through to it, and so for me that was a wonderful accomplishment to finally run the marathon.
What I'm fascinated about all of that is that for many people, what they think at the time is the worst thing in their life actually can manifest into some of the best things. And really what you've alluded to is the 3 goals that you set coming out of a burst appendix have now you've created and, give you a whole new sense of life that perhaps you may never have got to without that. So it's really interesting. What I'd like to ask you about, one of the things that I loved in the book was a table where you ask the team, or the team is asked, about the likelihood of success. So we're mapping out the periods, let's say quarter 3, and then on the horizontal line, one of the questions that must be answered is, what's the percentage chance of success? And it would be like 75% chance of success this quarter, and then 90% chance next quarter, or whatever it is. Like, that's such a great concept. Tell me about that and how you've seen that act out in real life.
So, Brad, you've been a part of multiple strategic planning facilitations, as well as I have, and they're so fun, right? You get in and it's just ideation and creativity, and you feel like you could conquer the world because it's easy. It's just a whiteboard, right? We can tackle the world. It's sort of like almost my silliness of, I'm going to write a book and run a marathon, and I'm going to do all these things, right? You have this, and you don't really know what it's going to take. So what I'm consistently doing, and when we do strategic facilitations, is it's not uncommon. I literally was with a client not too long ago, and they wrote down 80 different goals, 80 different opportunities of where they can go. Now, I know you and I both know 80 things are not going to happen, right? It's too many. So we go through a narrowing process. And one of those ways we go through a narrowing process is to put them through that table that you discussed. Yeah. Is let's look at the key things that we have and do 2 key things. Number 1, let's estimate the impact. How significant would the impact be? Now, the easy thing to do here is just use a 1 through 5. 5 is have the most impact, 1 is going to have the least amount of impact, and you can measure in between 1 through 5. The second thing that you do is, just like you said, Brad, what is the likelihood of us being able to accomplish this? What's going to happen is you're going to get a weighted average of all those goals that you listed. Then you're going to find, typically, the Pareto principle, i.e., the 20 things, or if the Pareto principle, for those who aren't familiar with it, is typically 20%, roughly 20% of our activities get 80% of the outcomes. Yep. So what that process does is it helps you winnow down to that Pareto principle. So then you could find the top, in this case, and literally when we worked with this client, it took our 80 ideas down to 15. It was perfect. It literally brought us down to the essential few. And from there, we started building out our plan. But that helped us define, these are the things we're going to have the most likely chance of success. And that strategy, that plan, like the how to come up with it, is so critical to winning it down. Because, Brad, the most common thing that's done in ideation is the SWOT.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you've read my materials in the past, I'm not a huge fan of the SWOT for multiple different reasons, even though it's been around since, the 60s, 70s, depending on,
So SWOT is strengths, weaknesses,
Thank you.
opportunities, threats for those.
Yes.
And I'd have to say, almost everywhere, surely all of our audience would know what SWOT is, but I just wanted to pick that up.
Thank you so much. And so, yes, that is the most common form of the ideation side. The problem, one of the key problems is every idea appears to be a good idea. Yeah. And so very early on, I try to narrow that down. And often I'll do that by just a simple exercise of not just of like putting dots. Okay, what are the things we most agree with? You have 3 ideas of the 20 ideas that came to strengths, and I'll do that for all the different areas. But nothing's worse than a strategic facilitation where all of a sudden you are talking about something that has a less than remote likelihood of taking place, less and less impact, no chance, and then you've wasted a significant amount of very valuable time with all your key executives. You're paying a consultant, and next thing you know, you're not actually working on them. Once again, the things that are going to have the biggest impact. And so that's what helped bring back the value of using a chart like that as discussed, which really makes it so much more meaningful.
So you spoke about the SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. One of the other things I loved in the book is called the SWOT trap. And as I read it, I'm like, this doesn't just apply to this. Like, I hear this all the time. So if you could, tell us about the SWOT trap, what it means and why it's a problem, and perhaps, some ideas to overcome that.
Yeah, I was alluding to it just there in a moment, so I'll go back to part of it, is that the SWOT trap is this feeling that everything is equally accurate. And so there's a couple of different pieces. Number one, most SWOTs are not data-driven. They're opinion-driven. For example, often, I can't say always, often you do a SWOT in the strengths, and they'll put down, we have great people. Couldn't be more of a meaningless result getting that. So what? You have great people. Like, all that means to me is you like each other. It doesn't actually mean you're effective. It doesn't mean you're engaged. It doesn't mean that you're experienced. All it means to me is you just feel like you're great people. So that's a big problem with SWOT, number one, is it's typically not very data-driven. Number two, we have this tendency, and this is what I was alluding to beforehand, of focusing on absolutely unlikely things that are ever going to happen. The threats is the worst often, and the opportunities is also a really big challenge, right? We'll be looking at different areas, and we just waste lots of time with it. So interestingly enough, I try to avoid the SWOT.
Yeah.
The reason is this. When you actually focus on where you want to go, and then taking the next step on how to get there, and you have a narrowing process once again, like we described beforehand, you actually don't have to do the SWOT. I view in many, many cases, it's a waste. Now, I'll say this. If you are more data-driven and you get proper surveys and engagement coming up front, and we do this as well, Brad, we will actually do high-level details and surveys and investigation. When you can get to more data-driven, I'll tell you an example where this worked really well. We did such a good survey. It was a Denison survey. The information that came out of it, they actually said, we need better people.
Wow.
It was amazing. It was literally the first time I'd actually had that result, because in the past, they always say, we're great. Now we had data to validate there was massive gaps in the organization.
There's always someone in the team who's going to say, but there's no data. Now, I think look, this is an example of best practice. The job to be done by the leadership team and the coach is to figure out how to get best practice to work best in their environment. Okay, so I'll put that caveat on that first of all. But I think it's about saying, look, sometimes we've got to work with the data that we've got, and something is better than nothing. Because some people, it doesn't matter the quantitative data that you get. They're always going to say, yeah, but we use this company for the data and they're not that good. We should use that company. And it's just they're looking for a self-affirming bias. They're looking for something that's going to validate what they already believe. And they just want to be led by that. So I think that there's a middle ground that we can find when it comes to data sometimes. And equally, in small to medium-sized businesses, let's say up to 100, 200 million, sometimes you just got to go with your gut. Sometimes you just got to make a call.
And Brad, I appreciate you saying that. Really the vast majority of my practice is working with small to medium-sized businesses. Yeah. And we don't often have great data, right? Yeah. It's like, what's your market size? Who knows, right? It's a massive, how much market share do we have? Who knows? There's so many pieces that are there. So you do have to get to a point of making decisions, but you have to be careful, right, there's a risk, right? Even despite how much experience they have, of, once again, whether rely on gut instincts and belief, right? And then whenever you can is try to bring the appropriate amount of data, surveys, information. it's super helpful, right, to help provide more clarity behind it. But yeah, you do have to make judgment, and nothing. I think you and I are both on this, Brad. Nothing's worse than not making a decision. Analysis paralysis is worse than not making a decision at all.
Well, as I understand it, that's the
I
mantra.
mean, sorry, moving forward. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Brad.
I know. As I understand it, that's the mantra of the US Army, which is any decision is better than no decision. Because when you've got troops under fire and there's no decision and they're just sitting there getting shot at, even a bad decision is better than none at all. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's an interesting way to think about it.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Using the same analogy, right? So they say speed kills in a good way, right? Meaning it kills in a positive way, right? When you move forward and you're constantly having traction, this is a funny thing that Brady has is sometimes people go, I don't want to grow. I'm happy with where I'm at. Now, anyone who's listening to this knows inflation has really been real this past 3 to 5 years compared to what it used to be. Yeah. Look, if you're staying flat, you are losing money each year. If you aren't growing, people within your organization don't have new opportunities to grow. If you're not, and once again, if you've been on the positive side, and I've been both sides in my career, but mostly on the growth side, growing and winning is way more fun. So that's why I generally like to work with organizations that want to push themselves to grow and grow at a faster rate than they generally would. That is so much more interesting and fun and creative, right, for those who are involved with that process.
In one sentence, what's he going to ask? In one sentence, why do you think that most companies fail at their strategy?
Time. They do not set aside time to execute.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, because they can build the best strategy in the world is only as good as its execution. There's a whole range of data, and you quote, I think, the same HBS study that I do in your material, which is 90% of strategies fail due to poor execution, something like that. Yeah. So for myself at the moment, I'm working on a new book, and it's about building a better business instead of a bigger business. So bigger isn't better, better is better. What do you think that a better business looks like?
That's a great question. And I want to go back to what I was saying beforehand. What you want to have is improvement and doing. So when I think of better once again, I'm not obviously writing your book, but that tomorrow you're better than you were today, right? The customer experience, perhaps if you're in a restaurant, the food you're providing, the employee experience, the culture that's there, right? What's really fun when you have that getting better every day mentality and you have a goal to where you finally want to get to, an outcome, a destination, you can have that similar experience of growth. I would agree with you. Growth for growth's sake is dangerous, right? There are a lot of people that go out of business because they open up their second store, right? Yeah. And so there are times when it's more wise to be the best breakfast restaurant in your corner location, and you're just going to work on always providing the best eggs and the best bacon and whatever it might be that makes it best in the world. For those who want to take the different step of becoming not just better, right, but growing, you still should be better, right? There's a lot of companies, once again, going back to that, grow themselves out of profitability. One of the reasons I don't often work directly with the VC world, venture capital world, versus the private equity world is the venture capital world is just wholly based on growth. Yep. And it's not necessarily providing value. It's just growing. While a private equity backed company cares about earnings. They care about the company, and the only way you are defining by getting better is by actually making more money, creating more cash flow that's coming through the business. And so that's often why I tend to work with those type of companies, because by the way, we need VC companies, right? That's incredibly important to create new companies, but I am more aligned with thoughtful improvement in terms of being better where you are, to be more effective, so you can grow. So I like an and philosophy, if that makes sense, often the time. But there's other times you have to think, where should you be going, and don't just grow to grow to have value. The reasons I was describing beforehand, right? You should have purpose behind the growth. I like to, want to navigate your strategy with purpose, right? So this kind of do things for a reason. Don't just do it because you've been told by somebody you need to beat inflation.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, very similar. If the problem with VC is that if you're a VC-backed company, the question, a bit like when you're on Facebook, is, are you the product? And you know what I mean by that. So what is a book that you might recommend for our audience?
As we all know, there's so many books out there. But one of my favorites, especially in the strategic planning execution field, and we were talking so much on the ideation side, but this has to do with the execution side. And it's the 4 disciplines of execution. Authors here, I'm looking over at McChesney and Covey, Jim Hewling. Excellent book. Highly recommend it. They really focus, and I mentioned several times this trimming concept of focusing on the essential few. And what's great is the first book was written after 1,500 strategic implementations. And the revised copy was after 5,000 strategic implementations. And I'll just say something worth briefly. Originally, they focused on doing 3 things only at a time. And after writing the second book, they said only do 1 thing at a time.
Wow. That's cool. Thank you for that. So how can people learn more about you and your business?
We're in many different areas. You already mentioned we have the podcast, Measure Says Podcast, for those who listen to that. Number 2, we have our book, Lost at CEO. You can find that on Audible and Amazon.com for those who want to be involved with that. And then, of course, we have our website, 40strategy.com. And then we also provide a lot of content on LinkedIn. You can find me at Carl J Cox.
Awesome. And what haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
I think actually it's been pretty comprehensive, but I will go to this next part, and it's a fun concept, and I'm just gonna like touch on it just for a moment. And it does have to do with the execution side. So Brad was mentioned beforehand, there's nothing worse, right, when we have all these wonderful ideas and we're not getting it done. And so the question I want to leave for everyone who's listening here is, if you're actually doing a strategic plan, have a plan to get it done. And one of my favorite books actually to help build this in is a book called The 12-Week Year. So there's a second book making a suggestion on. And what it talks about is doing 12-week sprints every quarter. Yeah. I modify this a little bit in our practice. I like to do 4 10-week sprints in a quarter. The reason why is because there's holidays typically that end up, like if there's for example, a New Year's holiday, people don't work very well during that time. They're typically spending time with families, conflict. And so I like to have 4 10-week sprints. And what that does is it increases the likelihood that you're going to actually get to the night. It's more you're checking on things, the more likely. It's sort of like if you're trying to lose weight, once again, if you go and weigh yourself each week or every day, you're going to more likely care about the type of food that you're eating each day or what exercise you're doing. Same thing when it comes to your strategy. You should have the same mentality that it really matters. We put all this time and energy. If we want to get to our new destination, we got to have a good execution plan. Love
it. Carl, it's been such a great chat today. I love the experience and the different perspectives that you've brought. So thank you so much for spending time with us today to share your wisdom.
Brad, you are a great host. Thank you so much. You asked great questions, and I appreciate your research ahead of time. You're one of the best research hosts that I have run into, and so thank you so much for having me be a guest on your show.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.